Hello, and welcome back to the Sport Leadership Accelerator. And today I'm really excited about having a uh, a former student at Laurier when I was the athletic director there, Chrissy McEwan. And Chrissy's got a really varied background in sport management that I think will be really interested to all of you in our audience today. And so, Chrissy, welcome to the Sport Leadership Accelerator.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here and excited to hear just more about what you're doing too. It's really impressive.
Well, first off, let's just start about, how did you start your career journey and maybe talk a little bit about where that was. You're from Sarnia, Ontario, and I'm
Yeah.
sure you had a very athletic background, and then
Mhm.
how you moved through your different stops educationally to where you are now in your business.
Yeah. Well, I always like to start by saying I was an athlete myself, so played competitive basketball and soccer, heavily involved in sports, but really didn't know where sport would bring me. So I would be remiss not to say Laurier and working at Laurier Athletics gave me my start. So I actually started out just working at the front desk. You probably remember that was as we were transitioning from the new facility with the expansion. So I had the opportunity to work at the front desk, and then I swapped over and started to actually work in the fitness center. I worked as a personal trainer at the Laurier gym, got to work as a strength coach, and then I also got to help run the basketball league. So I was a basketball coordinator there. So really, I owe Laurier to developing my leadership skills and helping me learn really what was out there on the sport side while still working on the business side. So absolutely loved my time there. And again, I think just a big piece of my time at Laurier was clearly just saying yes. I just kept trying new jobs, whether again, it was the front desk, which gave me a little bit of sales experience, to the fitness center, to being a trainer, and being certified and then running the basketball league. From there, again, with Laurier, I really knew I liked the sport business side. I ended up going to Ohio University and doing my master's in coaching education. So at that point, I really knew I loved the personal training, strength and conditioning world. So I did my master's, Ohio University, shout out, go Bobcats. That's a great, great school to really get your start. So did my master's there. And then through that program, I actually learned that Ohio University has the #1 sports admin program in the world. So while I was at Ohio doing my first master's, I applied for a second master's in sport business, sports admin. So it was really in that master's program that I understood more so about the business side of sport and the fact that there's ticketing and partnership and college athletics and player agency. So that gave me such a good insight. Through my master's, I got to do a bunch of internship opportunities. So I got to work the Super Bowl. I got to work for NASCAR in Las Vegas. I got to work for NASCAR in Richmond. And then I got some agency experience to really, again, just give me more insight into this evolving sport world. Through my experience at Ohio, I found out that I really loved the partnership sport branding side. And I also, being a basketball player myself and really enjoying the NBA for how advanced of a league it is. Obviously, you are familiar, I know. But the NBA, just with Adam Silver, they like to let their athletes have a voice. So I knew my first career job out of grad school, I knew I wanted it to be in the NBA. So from there, I used some of my network connections at Ohio to get myself a job with the Detroit Pistons. So originally being from Canada, Sarnia, Ontario, Detroit Pistons was a team that I grew up loving, really close to home. So my first career job, I was the account executive of premium experience. So I was in the ticketing department, as are many people as they start in the sport world. I think it just lays such a strong foundation. You really learn about the team side, you really learn about the sales side. Within a couple weeks of starting with the Pistons, I actually got a little bit of a promotion. So I swapped up to handling all of our highest end accounts. So our suite accounts, our courtside accounts, all of the highest spend ticketing clients, that was my book of business. So really unique experience to work very closely with a lot of CEOs, executives, entrepreneurs, a lot of different athletes who had Pistons courtside seats. So absolutely loved my time there.
Can you
Through
just
the
speak?
Pistons,
Can you just
yeah,
speak a little bit to that learning experience, especially some of your mentors that you may have had in that first real job experience on there? Like you had a lot of leadership experience both at Ohio U and at Laurier, but those mentors that you had um, to to really interact with, to
yeah.
role models to have, and so forth, and explain that experience.
Yeah, and I think why I love to hear so much what you're doing, because mentors have been everything to me. I think mentors are incredibly important for really giving you a real life inside scope of how to perform and do well in this industry. You can only learn so much being in school, but again, having mentors who have walked the walk, been in your shoes, and can really help you experience this transition period was incredibly beneficial. So my mentor who I worked for, she was actually the senior VP of corporate partnerships for the Detroit Red Wings. So I worked with her prior to her helping me get this job. I worked with her for probably about 8 months. We would have biweekly calls in which I would pretty much lead them in asking her questions, really understanding how she got to where she's at, really understanding the intricacies of the partnership world and who her clients are and how she services them. Again, all of those things you just don't learn in school. So that's why I think mentors are incredibly important. They just give you that inside scope of the real things that actually matter when you're in the positions.
And in those biweekly meetings, would she
Yeah.
uh, talk to you or give you things to bring back for the next biweekly meeting? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, yeah. So she would always give me little tasks or she would tell me to try something. So, like a very simple example is she would say, okay, you're feeling super busy in school. I want you the next time you drive somewhere and you have 20 minutes, I want you to use those 20 minutes to put in a podcast, or I want you to use those 20 minutes to call someone and learn about their experience. So she gave me little, like actual tangible things that I could work on to show up even better at work, which I liked a lot.
Yeah, those little action items that you can do on there,
Yeah.
and also too in terms of the learning process. When you are driving, there is some active learning activity that's going on in your brain as you're
Yeah.
processing things and so forth. So that's a wonderful tip that your mentor had. Um, speak a little bit more to your experience with the Pistons. You moved working
Yeah.
with your mentor, I guess, with the Red Wings directly, right?
Yeah.
To the NBA, which, as a former basketball player, that must have been
There you
a
go.
great experience.
Yeah, really, really cool experience. And again, like for me, right at the start, it was a lot about like understanding the business side of working for the NBA. So, what I personally did, and it was advice from my mentor, is I set up meetings with people in every single department. So, I learned about the partnership department, I learned about marketing, I learned to try and really understand where I wanted to go to next. Like I said, many people start, as you know, in ticketing because it is a great foundation, but I very quickly knew that that wasn't it for me. I wanted more. I'm naturally pretty creative. I wanted to be able to do more, and ticketing is pretty um, black and white, right? Like you're selling tickets, these are the price. You can't negotiate, you can't get creative. So I started to really put my eye on corporate partnerships. In corporate partnerships, you can get a little bit more creative, right? You can negotiate deals, you can toss in a flyaway trip. You can be more creative when you're sitting in those meetings. So for me, it was just wanting a little bit more when I decided to look more heavily in the partnership side. Now, on the ticketing side, I was promoted. So I ended up running our premium department. So I got to hire on a team. It was the first premium ticketing department that the Pistons have ever had. We haven't been good for a while. There weren't people paying for the courtside seats. So it was really fun for me because I got to be a part of a couple different projects, putting our courtside club down, putting some courtside suites down. So I did have the opportunity to be a little bit more creative. But again, I always just knew I wanted a little bit more myself than just ticketing.
And in that search for more, finding more of yourself,
Yeah.
what's really what you just said before about reaching out to people in other departments. You didn't stay in
Mm-hmm.
your lane,
Mm-hmm.
in your section. You learn from that. And for a lot of people, young people that I've been working with, they're afraid to reach out to somebody in another department because they feel like they're busy and so forth. But
Yeah.
what's been in your experience when you reach out with people? Usually, when you ask them
Yeah.
something to learn something,
Yeah.
what do they usually say to you?
I think they actually enjoy it, right? Like they get to share a little bit more about why they're there and what got them there. And I think most people remember when they sat in my shoes, right? So they're willing, just like now I'm very willing to talk to people who are just starting their career because I sat there at one point. Um, I mean, you can't get what you don't ask for, right? Like closed mouths can't be fed. That's what a client that I currently work with says all the time. You have to ask or else they don't know. Nobody has an idea, right? I'm sitting in a ticketing seat. Nobody has an idea that I like marketing or I like partnerships or that I did my master's or that I could do well in their department if I don't tell them, right?
Right. No,
So,
and you're really right. I've a lot of people have been afraid to when I was in a athletic director to ask me, but I don't think I
yeah.
ever said no to
I
anybody.
feel like you're
Sure, sit
very
down.
approachable.
Set on to it. So, so that experience sort of set the stage for your new experience that you've moved on to, and that's in the named image and licensing area, which is fairly new area. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what an opportunity to go into
Yeah.
an area that is, the people don't know where it's going to end up at,
Wild Wild West.
and it's also in a growth area that's really shown some exponential growth in the NCAA, as well as in pro. Is that right?
Mhm. Yep. And that's what I do now in the pro world and in NIL. So to give you a little bit more insight of like it feels like there's a little bit of a gap of how I made that transition, but to tell a little quick story. So when I was working with the Pistons in the premium department, we got a lot of access to the professional athletes because when people have so much money and they can spend $250,000 for a season on tickets, there's no gifts you can buy them in the world that they care about. So our gift to them was giving them access to professional athletes. So we would do meet and greets, we would do signings. But what I kept finding, and it was such a gap in the industry, is we would make these NBA players come sit in and meet and greets. They didn't want to be there. They would show up late. They would barely interact with my clients. And then my clients on the other end, who were CEOs, executives, very wealthy, would be angry about their experience because they could tell that the athlete didn't want to be there. So for me in the middle, it put me in a really weird position. So I started to think like, what else can we do to make these events more interactive, to make the players understand that they have to do this for these clients? So I really started to work with a bunch of our professional players, so the NBA guys, and then our alumni players. The Pistons have a great alumni group between Ben Wallace, Isaiah Thomas, a couple of those big names. So I got to sit with the athletes and do some personal branding activities. So I got to understand who they were, what they liked, what lit them up. It was never a meet and greet what lit them up, right? A couple of the athletes were really into fashion. So what did I do? I held a fashion show with Saks Fifth Avenue, our premium clients, and got the athletes to dress people at the fashion show. So again, pretty simple, but it made such an amazing experience because the athletes loved it. They brought all their friends out, which brought even more professional athletes there. Our clients loved it because it was at a high-end place. They could tell the athletes were engaged. So it really lit me up to fall in love with personal branding and helping athletes maximize their personal brand. I really found that it was a lot about me just advocating for the athletes to figure out what they wanted. They never wanted to go sit there and do a meet and greet. Some of them are really shy, some of them are outspoken, and they just nobody wants to sit there and sign autographs. So I just fell in love with this world, and that's kind of what led me into the NIL world, because that's exactly what it is, right? It's student athletes that now have the ability to get paid, but they also have the ability to like show who their personal brand is. They're not going to get paid if they don't have a strong personal brand. So now I have the opportunity to work with, as of last night, actually, I now have NHL players, but I have NBA, NFL, NHL, and NIL athletes in which I represent them as a player marketing manager or player marketing agent.
Oh,
Long-winded. It's all over,
but it shows your creativity that's there.
yeah,
And realistically, if you're an athlete, you want to be engaged in something that you yourself is interested in.
100%.
And you're right, they're going to be a lot more engaged than
Mm-hmm.
just showing up for an autograph session. That
Exactly. Yeah, so that kind of gave me a little bit of my why about why I do it now. And then the NIL is just very unique because a lot of these athletes are young, right? So they I didn't know who I was at 18. Most people don't, right? So they don't know their why. So they need help navigating that space. It's much like being a mentor, right? You get to help them through the nuances of being a student, being an athlete, as well as building their personal brand and how they want to show up on social media and how they want to show up in the world. So I not only do I love working with professional athletes, and I'll always keep my professional athletes, I really love the NIL space because it's much more of a mentorship feel because they need a lot more help.
okay, so you're working with the athlete.
Mhm.
How do you get like another brand or a business to be to work that partnership to match
Yeah.
the athlete's interest with uh, a company, a
Yeah,
partnership?
great question. So right off the start, let's say I start with an athlete, I go through a full branding activity in which I bring if they're an NIL athlete, I bring their parents, I bring their best friend, I bring their siblings, and I sit on a call with them and I really build their brand. So I understand what their why is, not just about winning championships. Like, what is your true why? Like, what's the reason you get up in the morning if things aren't going your way? Then I understand and help them work through their core values. Then I understand what their value prop is. So, what are their priorities, right? I try and understand their story. So, how they got here, what different points in their life shaped them to who they are. So, through that branding activity, I just learn a ton about them through their parents, their friends, themselves, of who they think they are. Some people I have to hold their hand a little bit more to help them. And then through there, that gives me the opportunity to then go pitch them to different brands. So I'm going to use an example of a girl who I have who plays at UCLA. She was before she even stepped on the court for her first year as a freshman, she went to a party and she was shot 14 times. So she was shot in all four of her limbs. She's in the hospital for almost a year. She just really, really struggled. They didn't think she was going to walk. She has a full story behind her brand. So, really, what I did with her as an example is I really understood. Sorry, I forgot to say she's now playing again, which is crazy. So, she's not
Right.
only walking, she's playing. So, what I did with her is I really peeled it back and said, okay, how did you recover? Okay, you used an infrared sauna. Okay, now I can reach out to a bunch of infrared sauna brands and say, this is how she healed. How can we? So I tell her story to the brand. And again, that's where I get the creativity, the opportunity to be creative is I really paint the picture for the brand so that Sunlight and Sauna wants to pay her $500,000 to represent her recovery and her journey. Or I ask, or I try and figure out like what supplements were you on while you were recovering, or what foods did you eat? So it really just gives me the opportunity to go out to all these brands and again be able to tell the story.
Yeah. No, that's a remarkable story on this particular
Yeah.
athlete, but it does
Mhm.
remind me you get the whole family together. There's a
Mm,
commercial here, usually on NHL games, of the Tkachuk brothers, and the mother's driving, and the two brothers are in their NHL uniforms, but they're kibitzing in the back and making all kinds of
that's
noise,
hilarious.
and then she has to stop the car and separate them. One goes in the back of the SUV, and one stays,
That's
but they're
hilarious.
hitting each other, on that.
That's
But
hilarious.
they got the whole mother involved in the commercial, and
I
she's
love
like,
that.
yeah, type thing. So
And it's a memorable commercial for you, right? Like that people really resonate when they get to see like real life what happens with these athletes. They're
for
just
sure.
people
I
like you
fought
and
with
I.
my brother going to hockey games a lot. So
There you
so that
go. There you go.
yeah, so that was there. So are there when you get into negotiating with companies, and what are some of the challenges that you do have? Like I know you if you have a really strong story like this woman
Mm,
athlete at UCLA,
mhm.
that has a really strong emotional tie that's connected to it. But
Yeah.
what are some of the other things that might come up in a negotiation that would be challenges that you've either had or overcome in uh,
Yeah,
in
I would say
in
one
connecting
of
them
the
with your athletes?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest ones in NIL is brands really wanting to underpay the athletes because it's the Wild Wild West and it's very, very new. A lot of these brands want access to these student athletes, but want to pay them significantly less. So it's almost always just these athletes being undervalued for what they can do. On the flip of that, something that I really struggle with a lot of brands with NIL athletes is because they're students and they're athletes and they're 18, they're young. So they're having a really tough time executing these deals, meaning if we promise 10 social media posts, they're not doing those posts, right? Because they're too busy or maybe they're too nervous to post on social media. There's a bajillion reasons why they're not. I find the professional athletes will execute their deals a little bit better, whereas those NIL athletes just aren't. So now there's a lot of brands that were heavily working with NIL athletes most recently are pulling away because their deals just aren't being executed.
Right. Yeah. I'm curious, are some of the boosters of colleges involved in NIL?
Yeah, so a lot of them now they're the collectives are taking over. So there's a company called Blueprint Sports, and they have collectives all over the place. So I'm finding now that so Blueprint Sports is the agency, and then they have all of their different collectives sprinkled around. I'm finding the more collectives they have, which would be their boosters that they have, um, across the board, they're pulling in more consistency. Whereas I found at the start of the NIL world of boosters, there was a lot of just like boosters throwing money and then the schools tossing money to certain teams, right? So it's again a lot of the wild, wild west. Now, what I'm finding lately is these collectives are kind of making it a little bit more of an even playing field and making it more consistent with like the teams that get the money or the athletes. But I don't, to be completely honest, like I'm not super familiar with the booster world and what's happening on that
Right.
end, just because I'll work directly with the athletes. So I know there's a
Yeah.
lot of money going all sorts of ways. You'll definitely probably know more than I know with that.
Yeah, one of the things that comes to mind in speaking with you is I just read an article of Cambridge, Ontario, former NCAA basketball player, but now with the national bobsled team. But
Cool.
she's, in terms of her funding, she's on a GoFundMe site. and
Wow.
look at Olympic athletes, especially in winter sports that are really only get the recognition every 4 years in a cycle.
Hmm.
That this could be an opportunity for those athletes that are trying to achieve their dream, but at the same time are financially strapped, in terms of
Yeah.
their training, their nutrition, you name it. So,
Hmm.
what would you say is the opportunity in Canada for, say, national sport body athletes?
Yeah, I think right now, like it's a very interesting world that we live in. Influencer marketing across social media has gotten so big. So if you can build up your own brand yourself and have a strong social following, doesn't matter what platform. I always like to tell people you don't need to be everywhere. You don't need to be on LinkedIn and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. Like there's a lot of platforms. Find your niche, lean into it, and then build your brand as an athlete. Give people an insight into your life, right? The exact reason why reality TV is so popular, I try and stay away from it, but it's so popular because people want to know what you're doing behind the scenes. So if I'm a bobsledder or I'm an athlete, showing people what I eat, because people are really curious as to how you what you eat to perform at that level. So I think it's really has to be a breakthrough for the athlete to want to build their personal brand and not be afraid of people on social media, right? We're too afraid of being like nervous of like, oh, people don't care what I eat every day. I eat the same thing, or people don't care. But really, like the habits that you implement on a daily basis to be that high level of an athlete are pretty impressive. You should share them and help people, right? Like I learn a ton from what professional athletes do on a day to day basis to make me a better professional just in my field. So I think the more you can just like give insight into your life and authentically build up your following, that's the point that you can then go out to brands. You don't need an agent like me, or you could have an agent like me, but you don't need one. You could go out to a brand yourself and say, this is my following and let me work with you.
Yeah. You mentioned the word authenticity, and first of all, you're very authentic when you you
Oh,
talk
I
about the
appreciate
passion that you
that.
have in your
Yeah.
career. But at the same time, a lot of people feel like they're judged on social media all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, the more you are yourself, the
Mm-hmm.
more I think you have an impact on other people. Like,
Yeah.
for instance, some athletes might say, well, I don't want to tell them that I eat, bowls every day,
Yeah. Yeah.
or oatmeal every day at lunch. But the reality is that, that could make an impact on even just one person,
Yeah.
that are following on that side. Myself, I have oatmeal every day,
There you
mainly
go.
because it takes a decision that I make every
Mhm.
day off my cognitive load. I've got
There you
a
go.
number of things that I want to do, but breakfast is a priority in terms of nutrition. But I don't want to
Yeah.
be a priority of another decision that I make every day
I
on
love
that side.
that.
So, speak to, when you're working with athletes on how you coach them on authenticity and the things that they need to uh, uh, put in to develop their own brand. Because no matter what that you can do, they've got to do it themselves. Personal responsibility has to take precedence.
Yeah, and that's always the tough piece, right? No, I think I have a lot of different like resources that I'll provide with athletes right off the hop. Like me, I can only give my personal advice so far. Always a book I get them to read right at the start. Change Your Paradigm, Change Your Life. It's a Bob Proctor book. And that book I find helps lay the foundation of really understanding if this is what I want to be, I have to be willing to do something different, right? And I think people are so scared to show up on social media again. A lot of it has to do with them like not truly knowing who they are. So I think a lot of it is like me helping them and I will say, I think this is why certain people do well in the player agency space and certain people don't, is really helping your athlete love who they are and care who they are and want to authentically show up who they are, because it really could just help one person. So the more they understand that, like, hey, you're the 1%, right? That made it. Think back to all your little league friends. You're the one person who made it, and your days on the playing field are only going to last so long. Like, show us who you are. We want to see who you are. We want this inside scope. And it gives me the ability to be kind of picky with athletes I work with. Like, I've got a couple, even NHL players that just don't want to be on social media. And it gives me the ability to, first, I offer if I can handle their social media. If they don't want that, it's hard for me to even want to work with you, because then it's really hard for me to make you revenue off of the ice if you don't want to show up, right? You haven't shown up for 10 years and you haven't made money off of the ice. Now we have to do something differently. So you have to either show up or just continue on the same path and not make money, right?
Right.
Just so it gives you the ability to be a little bit pickier with who you choose to work with. Because if they're not willing to make that change or put in that little bit of effort, then it's not worth me sacrificing my brand relationships for someone who's not going to show up and fulfill the contract.
Yeah. Well, maybe you can also elaborate on the business side of things
Mm-hmm.
for your own business. What
Mm-hmm.
are you mentioned in before we started the recording about uh, learning things and being a constant learner. So, what are the
Mm-hmm.
things that you had to learn as a businesswoman,
Mm-hmm.
um, or what are the things that you constantly have to keep up with this field, the different trends and so forth? What are the types of courses now that you're looking at, or the books that you're reading?
Yeah, so I myself still have multiple mentors in the space who are doing a lot better than I am, right? So I constantly am learning from them. This book, Lead the Field by Earl Nightingale, has been a really, really impactful book for me. But I'm constantly just looking at people, to be honest, like you. I've told Haley multiple times that I love the stuff that you're putting out, because I look for the people that I want to be like and that I aspire to be like. So I'll follow what you post on your LinkedIn frequently. If you post a book, I'll probably read it, right? If you post a podcast, I'll read it. So I have certain people across the board that are leaders in the industry that I'm just constantly trying to learn from and take as much as I possibly can. And then also putting it into practice, right? I think that's a huge piece that we miss. You can read and consume and listen to so many things, but I think that's why mentors become very, very important, is they help you put it into practice, the hundreds of books or podcasts that you read and listen to, right? So I think one of the biggest things to understand about this industry is, and me working on my own and me making this jump, is I knew that I was going to fail at certain things, right? But by using mentors, it helps me fail faster. They tell me stories about things that happen that I can avoid. So I just constantly like wake up every day and try and be a little bit better. And with my mentors, I ask the right questions. So when they failed, um, like, what did you do to get yourself out of that rut, right? I've been talking to one of my mentors who when she was a new mom in the space, she really struggled with her athletes wanting her to be available, but her also trying to be a mom. So my question to her is like, how, like, what did you do in those situations, and really getting tangible items so I can fail faster myself. To be honest, it's kind of a loophole.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
one of the things that I read a lot of Stoic philosophy on things, and
Yeah.
really, one of the things that I look back on, all the teams that we had at Laurier that won a national championship went through some kind of major adversity,
Wow.
either a year or two before they had. And when I think
Mm-hmm.
about all the things that even goals that you've tried to achieve, there's always been obstacles and challenges along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh, what and you mentioned that you learn through failure. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you learn another way to do things and so forth
Hmm.
from, and you learn faster sometimes by learning from mistakes. I have a lot of mistakes to share
Yeah.
with with uh, with the clients that I work with. Maybe talk to. Was there any major challenge that you had to face? It could be even a life challenge that you face that
Mm.
sort of was something that you had to reflect on that moved you forward.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Well, let's start with one and then I'll lead into my other one. So my first one, when I was 18 or when I was 17, I think you knew this, but I don't know 100%. I lost my mom. So I think that propelled me to always have this grit in myself of just living my life to the fullest. I've always had this feeling that I never want my life to get mundane. And if I don't like something, I'm able to move on pretty quickly, to go for what's next, right? If you're not willing to take that risk for what's next, you're never going to get to where you want to be. So even like changing it up and going to Ohio University from Laurier, like that was like pretty scary
It
and a
was a
pretty
big
big deal.
transition. Yeah.
Big transition
You
to
also
just
had a
move.
knee injury that
I had
affected
a knee.
your athletic life too.
True. If we want to even start there, yeah. Like I had dreams of always playing university basketball, right? I was recruited to different schools and I had a pretty bad knee injury that ended my career. So I've always had things that have just always propelled me forward. So I'm not saying they're easy in the moment, but they've always propelled me to want to continue on this journey. Now, what I've dealt with the work visa issues. So, for those who don't know on the call, I live in Florida, and me and my husband are both originally from Canada. I have dealt with so many work visa issues. It's unbelievable. So to backtrack, I originally took a job at University of Miami to be the head of their NIL department. So I would have ran all NIL at University of Miami. I waited 6 months in my in-laws basement for my visa to transfer. It was supposed to take one day. I waited 6 months and I found out I didn't get my work visa. So what did I do? I just packed up my stuff and moved to Florida anyways. So it's always about being able to pivot, being quick on your feet, knowing what you want your end goal to be, and just keep moving towards it. Like I can get slapped in the face 100 times, but I'll just keep getting right back up.
Yeah, and it's amazing how the universe kind of works that way. I
Yeah,
remember
exactly.
early in my career, I was a um, a coordinator for intramurals at the University of Toronto, and I did it for 2 years. And in my second year, um, sort of had a little bit of an issue that I wanted to make sure that I stood my ground on principle. They were paying me
Yep.
under what they were supposed to pay, and I fought to get it there. In the end, I got what I wanted, but I was also my contract was ended.
Mm.
They kind of
Hmm.
declared it redundant, which
Yeah.
is the largest intramural program in Canada, so I didn't understand that.
Not adding
But
up.
but in that, I did two things happen. One, I met my life partner, my wife Wendy, through
There you
that
go.
because I was looking for a job. She wouldn't hire me, mind you, but that's another
Yeah.
story at the time. Uh, but she was right. I wanted to go into education, and the job at OFSA had it up, and all the educational philosophy that I learned through again my mentor, a mentor
Hmm.
that was at OFSA, taught me that sport was a platform in which to educate. So I always kept that as one of my values
Yeah.
in leading. And little happened, even though I was let go at University of Toronto. University of Toronto remembered I stood on my principles and asked me at a young age of 31 to be their athletic director on their Mississauga campus. So
Wow.
so
So,
that's how things kind of turned out. And to be honest, if I would have
yeah.
stayed in intramurals, I probably still would be in the recreation side of things and not
There you
have the
go.
opportunity to where I found. So, sometimes those things you lose a job,
Yeah.
you have a death in the family, you have
Hmm.
a change in relationships
Yeah.
socially. those things happen for a reason,
Yeah.
and you have to utilize them and use the resilience
Yep.
going through it, because it's never easy going through it, but
Yep.
go through. One of the books that I read that Ryan Holiday has, it's called "The Obstacle is the Way." So there's always
Uh,
obstacles on things, but
yeah.
it's like water. You move
Yeah.
around it, and eventually you'll get to where you want to go to.
That's
And
great advice. I need to read that book, but I think you're exactly right. What's meant for you won't pass you, and just have to keep moving forward. It might not be what you thought it was going to be, but look, even what happened to you is it turned out even better than you could have
no,
imagined.
if I didn't meet my
Yeah.
life partner, you would have met a friend in Haley.
I wouldn't have an
And
officiant.
no, you wouldn't have
I
an officiant on that side.
wouldn't be
So,
married.
but on there, um, you know, this is there any other areas that you think NIL will move to? What is the trend?
Yeah, I think going back to what I was saying with the collectives, I think there's going to be a little bit more consistency across the board. Eventually, I hope to see a little bit more education around it. Again, there's student athletes being severely underpaid for what they're doing, and then there's that small percentage that's making millions of dollars, but they don't have the support when they're making those millions of dollars. So I just hope there's a little bit more education and consistency across the board. I think there will be, but the tough thing about college athletics is it just takes a long time in the states for things to happen. So right now, it's certain states it's legalized, certain states it's not. So they're working through a couple of things on the back end. I hope it happens sooner rather than later.
And in terms of building your own business, and a good portion now is your professional athletes that you're working with.
Mm-hmm.
How do you recruit athletes? They're not
Yeah.
easy to
So
get in
yeah.
contact with.
So going back to my one of my mentors in the space. So one of my Pistons courtside row one clients is the CEO of Mass Mutual Great Lakes. He is also the founder of something called the Podium Group. So it's him and a team of five ex-professional athletes who handle financial portfolios for professional athletes. So I actually work directly with him. So I do all of the athletes' marketing. He does all of their financial portfolios. So that gave me tons of exposure right off the hop to NBA, NFL players. And then through that, I've just, to be honest, utilized LinkedIn, made a bunch of connections with agents who need people like me. So usually most athletes are represented by two agents, one who handles all of their contract negotiations for like the actual contract that they're on, and then one who handles all of their marketing assets. So what I do. So if I continue to build relationships with these agents who are usually attorneys themselves, they want me because I'll guarantee their athlete more revenue. So I've just made a lot of really good relationships through LinkedIn, through past clients with the Pistons, that I just keep building my portfolio through that.
I wonder, with you speaking about athletes, one of the
Mm-hmm.
sports psychologists that I worked with is Dr. Dana Sinclair. She did all my pre-hire assessments of coaches and so forth.
Cool.
And she just came out with a book called Dialed In. Billie Jean King, Jamie Lee
Yeah.
Curtis, Don Mattingly, the baseball
Wow.
legend, has endorsed her
Mm,
book because she's worked with the Dodgers, Raptors,
wow.
the Portland Trail Blazers, a number of uh, baseball teams. She just finished a contract with the Washington Nationals. And
Wow.
she also got Bianca Andreescu ready to beat Serena in the
Wow.
U.S. Open. So, but
Jeez.
she also she works though with a lot of musicians and actors.
Cool.
Could this whole area that you're in expand to musicians? Because there's a lot of musicians out there that that have made their name actually initially in social media.
Yeah. So actually my mentor in the space who started in more so like the NBA, NFL space, she's now doing entertainment. So she's doing musicians, and then talent. So like actors, actresses. But yeah, it's very new that you're seeing them make money off of their name image, but it's certainly trending that way that we're going to continue to see that a lot in the future.
Well, there's a I this has been really interesting conversation. Um, One of the questions that I ask all of them is what does success mean to you, Chrissy?
Wow, that's an amazing question. I also ask my athletes that. Um, for me, it's just waking up every single day doing something that I really truly enjoy that gets me out of bed. Um, and then also finding the balance with that, because I think if you're not working a job or career that you love, if you're working a job or career that you love, but you don't have the family and lifestyle that you're looking for, you're not going to feel that success. So, really, just making sure I have that balance across the board. I live a fulfilling life on both my personal side, but also my professional side.
Yeah. Um, well balanced, holistic.
Mhm.
And I think you spoke to that in trying to um, know how athletes tick. You mentioned about the
Yeah,
NBA athlete that had an interest in fashion. You wouldn't have known that
yeah,
unless you kind of delved
sure.
into that. Maybe speak to that holistic balance in life. You have a passion for your career, but there's different aspects of your life too. You have your friend circles, you got your partner, you've got family, your dad back
Yeah,
in Sarnia and your
yeah,
sister.
yeah. Yeah, I think just really understanding that like we are so much more than just our job title, right? We are so much more than just our significant other or our friend group. So to really understand like who you truly are, like being okay with being quiet with yourself has been something that I've had to learn in my adult life to make me find that balance, right? Like really falling in love with who I am, what I bring to my relationships, my friendships across the board has made me better, and it makes me show up better professionally too. The more I dive into who I am. And how do I do that? I get quiet with myself. I do meditate, right? I read a lot of books that are like personal development woo woo, right? Like sometimes people like to dog on the books that are personal development, but that's all I read because I want to understand myself and I want to put all of those practices that I read and learn in real life to practice. So the more I can just get out in the real world and practice those things, like even me dropping myself in Florida, I knew no one except my husband. I knew no one, right? But still, like, I now live in a complex that I've met so many people and I go on meetings and I build relationships. I think that's what life's all about is actually putting all of these amazing philosophers' practices into play and actually just like really living my life, really enjoying my life. And that's definitely something that's came in my adult life that I learned after the Pistons, but it's something that's incredibly important to me.
Right. Well, and you're also reading, like you mentioned Earl Nightingale.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah,
his work is really foundational. He
yeah,
goes back to the 40s, 50s,
yes,
where he started. But Dale Carnegie is the same person.
yeah,
It's not
yes,
just the most recent books there, because it's all built on that. Myself, I read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, which was
yeah,
he was a Roman emperor
yeah,
2,500 years ago,
yeah. It's
and
not new.
no, and so reading is really really important, and getting better 1% every day
I
uh,
love that. I think that's
helps.
really underestimated, right? The fundamentals of success are things that we do day in and day out, every single day. And I think people miss that, right? Whether it is waking up and having your oats, waking up and working out, going for a walk daily, like that's the fundamentals of success is making sure we're doing the right thing, little 1% every single day.
Okay. Now, if anybody wants to read? Do you have any blogs or Instagram account or whatnot that you can share?
Yes. Yeah, I can definitely share my Instagram. So my brand's name is Athlete Connection. I can share all of this after so that you have it. Um, no, I don't have any books or anything, but I'd love for you to come up with a book that I can read.
Well, I'll give you one, and for any of the listeners that I just
Yeah.
read, and it's called The Story Brand, and it's by Donald
Story.
Miller.
Okay.
Story Brand, and it talks about the framework of a story, of telling your story,
Oh, cool.
and how that can influence people both in connecting them with their own story, as well as
Yeah.
telling them about their challenges and problems that overcome. And that's what I want to tell my audience is that when
Mhm.
I started out, I had all kinds of doubts about being it. And in fact, as an athletic director, moving from um, Arundel College, which was more of a recreational program, although I had built the Toronto Argonaut football operations and I had Doug Flutie and
Wow.
Pinball Clemens, Michael Clemens, who's now the president and general manager of the Toronto Argonauts. We played basketball in the morning while they went to practice in the day.
Wow. Sweet.
Um, but I was the first athletic director that hadn't come from the coaching realm. I came from the sport management business side of things,
Okay.
building facilities and
Yeah.
so forth. And it took them 8 months to choose me, and part of it was my sports psychology background because I had Dana,
Okay.
who
Yeah.
did all my pre-hire assessment. They thought that because I hadn't coached, I couldn't hire good coaches. But
Oh.
my talk was coaches need to be managed,
Hmm.
and they also need somebody to create revenue to help boost their program, to give them the
Yeah.
resources of which to do better things. And of course, my recreation background came back in the student leadership area because, like
Yeah.
you working as a convener
Yeah.
in a sport, that I was working with hundreds of students, teaching them how to lead, and I couldn't lead by it, and so forth.
Yeah.
Kind of like at Laurier, an international student from Pakistan said, "How come you don't have cricket?" And I said, "That's because you're going to create it, because I don't
Yeah,
know any cricket
exactly.
people."
Yeah.
So you just
That's a good story.
you serve in that area on that front. So,
Yeah.
but when I started out, I had all kinds of doubts. Could I be there? Could I make sure that I keep my job, being the first person in more sport management than that? Can I prove myself on there? Can I make a living for my family if I don't
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
make it, type thing? You get all those doubts, but when you're resilient, you find a way. And just as you've talked, and I think you've given a great
Great
message
advice.
to the people that are listening, that you set your goal and you go after it. So
Mhm.
thank you for this conversation today. It's been great.
Thank you. I actually got a lot out of you and got to learn a lot about you and kind of your journey too. So exactly that, right? We keep showing up like the person that we want to be, and someday we'll be that person.
Yeah, well, your authenticity came out today, and your passion for
Yeah.
what you do, and I know that you're helping all the clients that you're working with, and you're still building and growing, learning.
Oh, yes,
So
I will
so that's
continue to
great.
do that.
So thanks very much for being on today on the Sport Leadership Accelerator. Thanks again, Chrissy.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks.